Welcome back to the channel. This is the Casuals. I'm Jin.
And I'm Saki.
Today's episode is Time We're Not Getting Back, Borderlands Edition. And so, Borderlands, the game, holds a very special place in our hearts. Because I don't know, it's just so many memories associated with it, and so many things that we did in Borderlands, and it's kind of wild because I didn't know anything about Borderlands prior to playing it. I had zero idea that existed until you introduced me to it. Do you remember how you first introduced me to it?
Basically, it was after we did Halo for a while. I randomly stumbled upon it. Like, I found the game just, I guess, in my storage at my house. And I was curious. I was like, when did we get this? I don't remember ever buying this. So I popped it in, and this was on the Xbox 360 back then. This is a while ago. So I popped the game in and I played it for a little. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. But of course, there were characters with different classes and stats and stuff. And back then, I had no idea what that meant. So I was just like, oh, more damage equals more fun. No strategy, just kill. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I beat the game once. I was like, that was fun. And I'm like, I think Jen is gonna like this game. And so one day you came over and we were like thinking of something to do, and I'm like, oh yeah, dude, we should play this game. It's called Borderlands, specifically Borderlands 2, because I didn't even know it existed like Jin before. So I started with Borderlands 2, and we started playing it, and I was like, Jin, I think you're gonna like this class called Commando or Commander,
Commando, I think was the name.
Commando, Commando, because one, it's like an all-around character, plus you get a turret that helps you kill stuff, and I'm like, I think you're gonna like that. And since I already played the game once as the Assassin Zero, I believe,
hmm
I was like, I'm gonna try something different. And so I believe you were the Commando, and I went the Necromancer, our first playthrough.
Yeah, I do want to say, gosh, I think you might have gone the Siren.
Was it the Siren? And
I'm,
then our second playthrough
yeah, our
was
second playthrough I think was
Commando,
for sure.
Commando, and
Yeah, I
Necromancer.
stuck to Commando, but you went with the Necromancer because I think what happened was our very first playthrough. Um, you played the Siren, and I played the Commando, and then after we beat the game once, I think there was like a small gap between when I came over again, and by that time you've already played the game again, I think. Um, and during that time, the DLC came out with Necromancer coming out, and then you played it. But you hadn't touched Necromancer yet. And so when I came over again, you were like, "Oh, I'm ready," and then you're like, "Oh, let's start over a new character," or "I'm gonna start over a new character." And so I think that's when you went Necromancer on our second playthrough, and I still stuck to Commando. I think during that time.
Yeah, I believe you're right, actually, now that I think about it. I did play Siren before. And so I guess I did Siren, you did Commando first run through, we beat the game. Was it okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but here's a quick story about the end of the game.
I think we should. Yeah, let's talk about that.
Do you want to talk about that now, or
Yeah,
would you
I
like to
think
wait?
I think it'll give you an idea. I think it'll give you an idea of how the adventures throughout our time went up to that point.
Alright, so here is probably one of the funniest things that happened in Borderlands 2 for us. So, first playthrough, he's Commando, I'm Siren. We're on the final boss, which is called the Warrior, and it's this big, what, magma rock dragon type thing,
Yeah.
guardian that guards the vault. They're called vaults, and so it's like the biggest thing in the arena. It it does move around, so you have to like track it a little bit. But we were fighting it, and I'm shooting at it because I already know how to do it. Because this is technically my second playthrough, but my first playthrough with Jin. So I'm shooting it, and I'm like, Jin, help me! I'm gonna run out of ammo soon. I need your help shooting this thing while I go get ammo. And I just see Jin just spinning in circles. I'm like, what the heck are you doing? And you're like, dude, I don't even see it. What are you shooting at? And I'm like, dude, turn around. It's the biggest thing that's moving. And you were spinning, and it went on for a couple minutes, and you're like, I still don't see it. And so I literally paused the game where I was looking at it, and I was like, okay, Jin, I could see you on on because we did a split screen. So I'm like, Jin, I could see you on my side of the screen. Literally look up. So you're like, okay, okay. I unpause it. You looked up. You're like, I found it. And I'm like, dude, it took you like 5 minutes to notice the biggest thing in the arena.
Mind you, this was while the battle was ongoing, right? So we're dealing with like the small mobs that the warrior summons to deal with you at the same time, and and it's it's kind of chaotic during that sense, right? So while we're fighting, trying to deal with the boss, here I am, just like, where is it? This whole time, like all you hear is just like us, like kind of shouting at each other, like, dude, it's right there. I'm like, I still don't see it.
Put into perspective, let's say you're in New York, staring off at the coast, looking at the Statue of Liberty. Yeah, he couldn't see the Statue of Liberty. That's how bad it was. It was like this you looking at the Statue of Liberty, and he couldn't see it on a
And
clear day.
in my defense, as a reason why I could not spot the warrior was because one, we were split screen co-op, right? So screen space is limited. And two, the colors back then for the warrior fight was pretty dark overall. Lighting wasn't the greatest in my opinion, from what I remember, and so the warrior, which it doesn't help that he's basically the same color as the environment, kind of blended in for me back then. Um, so that's my excuse, but Saki was able to find him every time, so I kind of don't have an excuse at the same time.
Well, I'll give you a little defense. It was my second playthrough, so I kind of knew his spawning spots. You know how he dives in to the lava and
Yeah.
he spawns somewhere. I kind of knew the three spots he came in. This was your first playthrough, so I kind of knew, but you didn't. So I'll give you a little what is it called? A little buffer there of like extra cushion.
Yeah.
I'll give you that. And I do agree that yes, the warrior and the environment are about kind of the same since you're in like that volcano area, like looking area. So yeah, he did blend in pretty well, but I don't know. I don't know what was up with his sight that day, but second time, yeah, he was fine. He saw it. He knew what to do. But yeah, that first time, oh, that was the funny, probably one of the funniest things. There are many more stories. So this is probably gonna be what? How many parts to this? Like
Three, I think,
five,
is probably gonna
three?
be where it's
Oh,
gonna be at. Um,
yeah. Well.
for specifically Borderlands 2.
Oh, yeah. Okay. For Borderlands 2, yeah, we could cut it off at 3, even though it could go on forever. But
Gosh, so we did talk about like quote our first playthrough of the end of the first playthrough, but we still have to get to the very beginning of it. So, uh, gosh, I remember we didn't skip any cutscenes because this was my first playthrough of it. This was your second playthrough at this time. So you knew basically the whole story at that point. And it was really like, my first adventure, just like up to me, like finding out all the stuff. And so I remember when we first selected our characters and everything, you were like, "Oh, I'm gonna try Siren, right?" And be like, because apparently she's like a supportive character.
right, yeah,
And
she was more well. Each class had like different skill sets you can use it. You can use it more offensively or defensively. And for our run, I chose more defensively.
Yeah, more supportive and defensive.
Yeah.
And the reason why you ended up doing that was because you knew from my habits from Halo that I'd like to run in without
Yes,
any
I knew you
thought.
were gonna go. I knew you were gonna be offensive, so I chose to be a little more defensive.
And so I was like, oh, I had no idea about the game, so I went with your recommendation, which was play Commando, right? Because he was an all-rounder, and he seemed like a generally good, what's it called, beginner character. And
Right.
so I went with Commando, and man, I remember watching the cutscene. I'm like, what the hell is going on, right? Because this was Borderlands 2, so I had no
Right.
context of the previous Borderlands and whatsoever happened. Apparently, in terms of like the actual like, how do you say this, story itself, Borderlands 1 doesn't really come into Borderlands 2 at the beginning. Like you can play through Borderlands 2 without ever knowing what happens in the event of Borderlands 1 because one, they explain it in the game what happens. Kind of. They gave you context of what's going on. Because some Borderlands 1 characters are in Borderlands 2. But the main cast of Borderlands 2 were not in Borderlands 1, if that makes sense. The characters that you are able to play. So that's why you're able to play Borderlands 2 without Borderlands 1, but there was still some context that if you played Borderlands 1, you would know it more immediately in Borderlands. It would show immediately in Borderlands 2. But since we had no idea, I had no idea exactly. So I was kind of lost at first. I was just like, whoa, we're in a train, and this train blew up. And suddenly we're out in the snow, frozen to half to death. And then comes the meeting of Claptrap. Oh, Claptrap. Oh, Claptrap.
Oh, Claptrap. Probably the most loved and hated character in the entire series.
And how he's loved and hated is, well, once you start hearing him, he doesn't shut up.
And they do, well, yes, he doesn't shut up, one. And two, characters also reference why they hate him so much.
And
May I have a quick little thing about that? I just thought of a story about that.
oh, go ahead.
Okay, so in probably the very beginning of the game, you beat the first little mini boss called, what was his name? It was a Bullamong.
I think it was Bullmong, yeah, but I don't remember.
Oh,
Something with two
that
eyes.
was no, that was the name of the enemies were Bullymongs, but I forget the actual name of the mini boss. Anyways, you beat him, and then you go into a little town in the snow, and you meet a character named Sir Hammerlock, and he hates Claptrap kind of with passion. So, because what he did was he put an electric fence around his like little house,
Yeah.
so it keeps enemies out and Claptrap, and so Claptrap's like, oh my gosh, he can help fix me up because in the mini fight with the Bullymong, his Claptrap's a robot. His eye gets ripped out, and so you kill the enemy, you get the eye, and Sir Hammerlock is supposed to fix him. And so as he's gonna go get fixed, Claptrap comes walking up to the gate, touches it, gets electrocuted, and kind of gets knocked out. And so Hammerlock introduces himself. He's like, "Oh, I can't stand the voice of Claptrap. It feels like my brain cells are killing themselves one by one." And I was just dying because he just wanted Claptrap to shut up. So he was like, "Hey, you're called a Vault Hunter." He's like, "Hey, Vault Hunter, let the Claptrap touch the gate. Just stay back."
I do remember that. Yeah. So, rewinding back just a bit. So I was very, how do you say this, fascinated when we first played. Like the very first like beginning, I was just like, well, what's going on, right? I was lost, but when we woke up, you had to explain everything to me.
Hmm.
Like what was going on, like all the, like the hub, the like the shields and everything, the health. Well, there wasn't any shields during the time. Um, at the very beginning, you get that later, but you explained to me that there will be shields, and you were explaining to me like you can get these stats and everything. Like, he basically told me everything in the beginning, and it was kind of like hard to process all at once, but you still explained it, which did help eventually. And I remember just asking, like, at the beginning, I was like, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And you're like, yes, no, yes, no. I
Oh,
remember that.
I do remember you asking me all those questions because I did know the answer, but I remember one specific question was, "Is there fall damage?" And I'm like, "No, there is no fall damage. You could jump off a skyscraper, land on the floor, and not take any damage." And you're like, "That's all I needed to know."
I was just like, yo, my one weakness is no longer there.
Because in Halo, there is fall damage. You get punished if you jump off too high of an area and land. You lose like your shield and probably some of your health, or sometimes it's instant death. But with Borderlands, that's not the case. There is no fall damage, so you could jump off wherever you want.
Yeah, and so let's see. We went through like the whole like mini boss and everything, and I remember you were explaining that rare guns could drop. I think. It
Yes,
might have been that first playthrough, or it might have been the second playthrough, but you did explain that rare guns could drop from the boss.
yes. So, uh, there are guns called legendary guns. They're very different from normal guns. Like the most common, there's like a white glow around it. And then, the more rare it goes green, white, green, blue, purple, and then orange at the time. So orange was like if you saw an orange glow around a gun, that was going to be a really good gun. And so I explained, I was like, "Hey, some mini or actually most mini bosses or characters enemies with names, not just the generic name, but they actually have a name on it. They have a chance to drop legendary weapons." And so you were just like, "Is that so?" And so I remember after we did the playthrough once, you were like, "Dude, there's a specific gun I want," because you did a little bit of research into it, and because I told you about it, and you're like, "Oh, that sounds like an OP gun." So you researched it, and you're like, "Hey, I think it was the Warrior dropped something called the conference call shotgun," and you were like, "That is probably the best weapon for me." And so we literally just were grinding, killing the warrior just for that gun. And when we finally got it, you were so happy.
Yeah, it took us a long
Because
time.
it took a few hours, but that gun shoots vertically and horizontally at the same time. So it's
Yeah,
just like a wall of bullets coming at you. It's hard to dodge. And you were just like, "That is the best thing ever."
yeah,
And then, and then after a while, the second DLC, Torg's Campaign of Carnage, I think, came out.
yeah.
And I told you, no, actually, this was way before that. You found a new favorite gun. It was a rocket
Indeed.
launcher called the Nukem. Man, that after you found that, you're like, "No, this is way better than the shotgun. This is my favorite one."
And there's a reason why it was my favorite because Commando, also known as Axton, has a very specific build path in his like skill trees because as Saki said earlier, there's 3 skill trees that you can usually choose from for each character, and so with those 3 skill trees, each skill tree comes with a very unique set of abilities or like enhancement to their kits, and at the very end of the skill tree, because it's not unlimited or anything, it's very there's a certain amount of points that you could put in. At the very end of the skill tree, one of Commando's skill tree, or let me explain this better. At the very end of each skill tree, there's a unique, like, I guess, upgrade to your skill. A very unique one. Usually, it super enhances the primary skill that you're using. And so, one of Commando's or Axton's unique skill was when he throws out a turret, it causes a mini nuclear explosion on impact. And so, during that time, I had already max leveled Commando, which was level 50 during that time.
Way
And
back when.
yeah, way back then. And I was like, I discovered the fact that Commando can throw a nuke. And I was like, oh my god, I gotta go all out for this. And during that time, you were able to, I believe, go into 1.5 trees. I believe that was level 58.
Yeah.
And I configured it where I get 2 turrets. And that was like halfway through the second tree. The first tree was a nuke tree, and the second tree was 2 turrets. And so I was like, I can throw 2 nuclear turrets, right? And then I discovered the fact that there was a rocket launcher, because I believe you mentioned it to me. There was a
Yeah,
rocket
'cause
launcher. Oh,
I was gonna say yeah, because I had one already, and I let you use it because you were like, oh my gosh, I let you use it, and then you built your skill tree around it. You respec
yeah.
into the nuking.
And so, how do I describe this? Every time we got in a fight, all you would see is just an explosion followed by another explosion followed by another explosion. And I'm not talking about like just like small grenade explosion. I'm talking about like you actually see a
Nukes.
nuclear bomb mushroom cloud, mini mushroom clouds go off constantly.
Yeah.
And um to be fair, this build was not strong at all. It barely did any damage in retrospect to the end game, because um relying on 3 sources of explosions for damage is not a very good thing in Borderlands 2, and I think in general Borderlands. So it eventually, like, the novelty wore off, and I switched to a different build. Um, no, actually, I did not switch to a different build. This would be when we actually do a whole completely new playthrough, and I chose a completely different character during that time, but I will get to that later. That's probably going to be like for the second video. So we'll save that for now. So back to the beginnings of like when we were discussing about the first playthrough. So we went through like the whole ice boss, and um, do you remember the 2? I think it was like the twins or something like that. Not the twins. It was the
Boom
guy.
boom.
Huh?
Boom boom.
Yeah, it was Boom Boom. And I remember you were like, this was the first time I got introduced to like the true sense of Borderlands 2's like naming sense. You know what I mean? Like their unique names or something like that.
Yeah.
They're hilarious names. And the first one was Boom Boom, and I think it was spelled BEWM twice,
And
right?
no, it was boom like BOOM, and then boom BEWM. It was one was a normal sized guy, and the other one was like they're. I don't know if I am allowed to say this, but I'm going to anyway.
It is
They're
a
called
game
midgets.
terminology, yes.
Game terminology, they're called midgets.
Yeah. And this is literally what they're called. It's not a nickname we came up with. It's literally they're called midgets. And so,
Yeah, don't hate
um,
us.
I guess it would be a better idea to explain the game, the mob types or like game size types. So there's the um, normal sized characters, which is like normal sized enemies, which usually consisted of psychopaths and um, soldiers, right? Those were like the 2 main ones. And then there was the
Right.
smaller sized enemies, which were called midgets. They varied in size. Some of them would be very like small, and some of them would be extremely small. Um, and then the other ones would be called. We didn't. There was no real name for them, like no real classifications. Um, they were just bigger. They were pretty beefy, very big. Usually they were very unique. They weren't just big for a reason. Usually the bigger size, because usually the sizes indicate the uniqueness of the mob, and so
Are
small
you
size.
talk? I was gonna say, are you talking about the class type not the class type, but the badass enemies?
I'm including the badass, the flamethrowers, the you
Oh,
know,
okay. The kind of the chonkier
yeah, the
characters.
chunky, just chunkier characters in general. We'll get to that classification, the ones you were just talking about later in a bit. But just in general, the sizes usually indicated that they were unique in some way, generally, and so with that comes another set of classifications that are also unique to, um, you know, each type of mob. And so, you want to explain this one?
Sure, I'll do my best. Yeah, there was another classification called badasses, which meant sometimes they could be regular size, except the psychos. The psycho badasses, I don't know why, but they, for some reason, one of their arms got like ginormous and they increased in size, like their actual physical body, but only one of their arms increased in size and not both. But most of the other badass type characters, they were around the same size. Only the Psycho was the one that grew. And then they would be a lot tankier, so they'd have like at least twice as much health, I think. And they also do like twice as much damage. So they're a little bit like more of a threat, I should say, instead of the regular guys. But then also with that, sometimes you would find something called a super badass, which is even, you know, tankier than a badass. So it probably, I think it's what, triple times?
Yeah.
About triple times health, triple times damage. And those things hurt. If you're low level and you're not prepared with, you know, like equally as good guns as them, you're gonna get wrecked. And it'll show because there's a thing called fight for your life. Like once your shield and health are completely depleted, you go into a thing called fight for your life, where you have to kill something or a friend you're playing with has to revive you within I don't know how much time. And if you don't, you technically actually die and you have to like respawn and like refight the guys you were fighting, I believe. And so those badasses could hurt sometimes, and sometimes you have to be careful. But if you're max level, you have like the best loot. You like we'll get into this I think probably next episode, but the second playthrough where Jin was talking about we're doing different characters, he chose something called the Gunzerker. And his special thing is he can wield two guns with his like ultimate ability, I guess. And he's the only character that can hold two guns out and fire two at the same time. And when he figured that out, he was kind of gun happy like the Gunzerker character is. And yeah, once he figured out the best combo, he was unstoppable.
And this is to go back to the fight for your life system. We also discovered that Maya the siren Maya specifically had a skill with it, or like a trait within her skill tree set that she is able to revive downed players with her ability. Normally that does not happen because her ability basically does a what we call a crowd control effect on an enemy, where she uses like this. I don't know.
Phase grasp. I think it's phase grasp.
Yeah, it's phase grasp.
Oh no, phase lock. Phase
Oh, phase
lock.
lock.
All
Phase
right,
lock.
sorry.
Yeah. So essentially, it's basically like kind of like summoning like a gravity bubble type deal, where like it locks in the enemy for like a couple, dependent on the enemy type too, where it locks the enemy for a certain amount of time and duration. And that's her basic ability, and it like her trees branch out, basically enhancing those abilities. And so since he went for the defensive, more supportive route, one of her skills, or one of her, like, I guess, abilities that she gets when leveling up a skill is that she can revive, fight for your life, or down but not out state allies. And so you saw this and you're like, you're gonna need this. Because as we quickly discovered, I like to go down a lot. One, it's because I was very new to the game, but two, I just liked running in with no thought behind my actions. And so
That, and can I add something to that fight for your life?
oh, go ahead.
The more times you go down, the faster the time frame is to revive them.
Yeah.
So if you go down like 8 times and you haven't like died, and you go down like a 9th time, sometimes it's literally almost instant death. You just immediately die. There's like no chance to being revived.
Yeah. So it's a pretty interesting like mechanic for the game because it adds a little bit of dynamic to it. And so Um, with that, in terms of like figuring out all the game mechanics, it became pretty clear what kind of roles we were doing, which is you being like you already kind of assumed that you were going to be more supportive and defensive just because you liked playing in the back more, but
Yes.
after playing through and like in the beginning, it pretty much became very clear that this is how it's going to be all the time. Where you're just
Yeah.
sitting in the back and I just run in with like monkey mode essentially, and so
Yeah.
um gosh. So after we discovered, like, basically our basic playstyles and going through the first boss and everything, the first boss wasn't too special, in my opinion. I mean, it was just basically figuring out that each boss was all like, oh, they're pretty unique. That's it. First boss wasn't that hard or anything. You just had to explain, and we played through it normally. And so we finally get to Sanctuary. Um, and Sanctuary is basically the hub for the the
The
characters.
good guy. The good guys.
Yeah, and we had to do some stuff. Sanctuary isn't initially open for you guys. For like when you're playing through, it isn't initially open to you. You have to do like a few side jobs in order to get in. And so after we did the side jobs and everything, we what's it called? I was introduced to the system of like when we turned in quests. Sometimes each quest, or sometimes a quest has a unique, I guess, option for you. Which is they give you two options between to select between two rewards. And I remember, I was like, what do I choose here? Right? I have no idea what to call it. And since you knew what the game was basically about, you already played through it once. You knew which one was the better reward. And so every time there, like I would go turn in the quest because I think during the first playthrough you would have me turn in most of the quests, just so I know and like understand the game better. Um,
Mhm.
it would be constantly like, "Hey Saki, which one do I choose for the reward?" And you just look at it like, "Ah, yeah, that one, right?"
Yeah.
Um, and so it would basically be that, and I think like that really hasn't changed just because I never really went into depth like in terms of like what like min maxing the rewards in terms of that. I never really knew, so yeah, um, that's just one small tidbit. Going back to Sanctuary, once we opened up Sanctuary, gosh, um, I guess I would have to explain this a little bit more. In our first playthrough, you asked me straight up, you're like, do you want to just play through the main story, or do you want to also get all the side quests done while we go through the main story, right? And I was just
Yes,
like,
I did ask that.
and you're like, I was like, well, I don't know, is it required? And you were like, nope, it's not required to do any of the side quests in order to complete the game. And
It
but then
just
you,
makes it easier.
yeah, you're like, it just makes it easier, but also you can get some cool stuff from it. And I was just like, cool stuff, I'm down. So we literally did every single side quest possible. And when I mean every single side quest, I literally mean every single side quest. We did not skip a single one through our first playthrough.
No, I also did mention, or not mention, but I also did tell you, we're gonna do side quests before we do story missions. So any side quests we got before a story mission, we're doing it.
Yeah, and so
And so that delayed our game by hours.
because I don't know, I don't remember if you did every side quest during your first solo playthrough. Did you?
I did. It was very difficult because some of them were battle arenas, and I wasn't the greatest at the game yet, so it was a little more difficult. But I was able to do it, so I was like, well, with a second person, it should go a lot smoother. So
And it did. Mainly because one, I was the target bullet sponge, and you were the one that was able to do what you wanted to do freely. And having the person that knows what they're doing in the game be unrestricted in what they're able to do, except for like a few minor things like you having to revive me and everything. But um, the heat's off you, right? And the heat is mainly on B, and so like a lot of the quests went a lot smoothly than you would initially think, just because of our playstyles are so different, but basically complement each other in that sense. Um,
yeah. Also, I want to add that the side quests went so much smoother because sometimes you would get side quests in the same areas. There'd be like 4 quests to do in this one area. And I'd be like, okay, I'll leave the waypoint for you. I'm gonna do the other ones because I already know how to do it. So you just follow the instructions, and I'm gonna go do the other ones because I've already done these. And so it would go like twice as fast. Instead of one person doing all 4, we'd split it 2 and 2, and so it just made things a lot easier.
Yeah. And so, um, that was basically like the kind of like their, rinse and repeat gameplay for us. And so, um, gosh, there's so much I want to talk about, but we are actually nearing the, our usual time for the recordings, and I do want to save the stories of the unique characters that we've met that are very interesting, including enemy mobs and everything, um, for the next episode, because that's a whole like plethora of like unique mobs, unique like characters that are truly unique. And I'm not talking about like the badasses or like the occasional like enemy mobs. I'm talking about like one of a kind characters that you'll never meet again, essentially. Um, and so we'll save that for the next episode, and we'll probably end it here for this episode. And so yeah, that's the beginnings of our Borderlands adventures, and we'll continue talking for the next when the series gets uploaded again. We'll be talking about all the unique characters, and we do have some very funny stories and some of our most treasured, what we call unique NPCs. But for now, we'll leave it here. So I'll end it. So I'm Jin,
And I'm Saki.
and this is the Casuals, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.